So we have some new people here. So our focus in the legislative committee is state legislation here in Oregon. That doesn't mean we exclude federal, but that is really where we focus. And what we are looking for are climate bills that we can support or bills that we want to oppose. We work extensively with other groups in Oregon, which really expands and amplifies, I think, our voice. So we're in partnership with all the major organizations and are part of that environmental climate team in Oregon. I think kind of a key clog in there. We've been building that the last few years. We've got a great team. We're strong. One of the things that we look at is, when we set our agenda, is what are the priorities of climate reality? What are our limitations and our expectations from our volunteers? And then we just kind of start going to all those meetings in Salem and on Zoom and supporting legislation through testimony, verbal and written, and spend a lot of time in Salem, which is, if you haven't done that, where you walk the halls and sit down with your legislators and attend those meetings, it's kind of adrenaline producing. I think it's a very cool thing. We have, if you have any questions, Amanda, Helena, and Kelly are all on our committee, 3 strong members. And yeah, I love, it's just a great group. Anybody have anything they want to add to that?
I will just say that we'll have a little bit of time after Pam's presentation to talk among ourselves. And if anybody has questions about the committees, we can continue with that after Pam's presentation. Thank you, Karen. Anything to add, Amanda?
No, except maybe legislative days are the 23rd through the 25th.
Thank you. So I want to just give a little shout out to our education team, which is run by Lynn Merrick, who was intending to be here. Hope everything's fine. But if you want to get in touch with the education team, I'm going to put Lynn's email in the chat. And also the clean energy team for Climate Reality Project Portland chapter doesn't have regular meetings, but it's definitely working in the community. And Nick, whose email I'm also going to put in the chat, is very happy to help people get oriented to things to do and sort of how to work in tandem with the Climate Reality Portland Clean Energy team. I think Lynn Haroon am I pronouncing your last name correctly? Not quite. Okay, sorry. You're on mute. It's okay. So Lynn mentioned that she was interested in everything kitchen related, food and food waste. And in fact, our climate friendly foods team is in need of reconstituting. So we had a couple of members who were really interested in the exact same thing who left in different directions. And so if you're interested in that, there is definitely a huge space for that in our world. So thank you for your interest in that. I don't have a team to send you to, but if you want to start one, we would super welcome that.
Great, thanks. I'm finally back. Okay. I got my mute, the button, everything.
How is your last name pronounced?
Haroon, you were exactly
Haroon,
right.
okay.
That's what I was trying to say. And then of course the screen disappeared. And anyway, tech problems.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. Thanks to everybody for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to Karen. Oh, lovely. Lots of things in the chat. I'm going to turn it over to Karen to do an introduction for Pam, and then Pam will take over with the presentation. So I'm going to put myself on mute now.
Okay, thank you, Helena. So for 11 years, Pam Vergun has developed programs that have led the way in involving youth, parents, and other adults of all ages in climate activism. She is a climate reality leader and a climate reality project mentor. She founded the nonprofit Climate Change Recovery and its program, Youth and Adults Acting for Our Earth, known as YAY, with her family. Her children, Miko and Isaac, were the first youth leaders of YAY and are also climate reality project leaders. YAY builds on Pam's experience in program design and evaluation and exemplifies the ability of people to support each other in taking action, and provides the necessary training to get more of us involved in the global climate movement. In addition to serving as Climate Change Recovery's director, she is the project manager for Elders Promote the Vote, or she likes to call it Elders and Friends Promote the Vote, a program of Elders Climate Action, which is part of the nonprofit Elders Action Network. Dr. Vergun brings to her climate work a decade of program assessment and support in education, healthcare, and other fields, as well as several years spent working with an international nonprofit, Plant for the Planet, as executive director and board member. Thank you, Pam, for your leadership and your creative energy in working to solve the climate crisis, and for sharing with Climate Reality Portland the Environmental Voter Project, which is a nonpartisan, effective action we can all take to get environmental voters to the polls. And just on a personal note, last spring, I did work with Pam's group on Friday mornings with their phone bank through the Environmental Voter Project. So I can tell you firsthand, it's a way to get involved in this really important election in a really positive way. So Pam, thank you so much, and I will let you take over.
You bet. Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning, Karen, that you were a part of the phone bank early on. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So I'm going to do a mixture of sort of more traditional storytelling and switching back and forth between slides. I hope that'll work well for folks.
And if you could just increase your volume probably a little bit, that might help.
You know, we tried this earlier. It seemed like it was all right.
It's just a little.
Yeah, let me try with the headphones. Let me know, everybody, how it sounds. This is better, or give it just a second. Sometimes the mics help. Is that audio better or about the same?
I think it's better. Is that Steve's not so sure.
Okay. I'll try and be nice and loud. Is this generally working well for most folks? If you do a thumbs up or something, or no, so I know. Okay, great. Okay. So, you've already heard that I have 4 family members who are part of Climate Reality. I'm going to take you back to a little bit of the beginning. When I was 17, I started hearing about this thing called climate change. I was worried at that age about 2 super big things: nuclear weapons and nuclear power and global warming. And at the time, I thought, well, the nuclear weapons, that's really scary and harder to deal with. And I happened to have a friend who had been there during the bombing of Hiroshima, and a couple friends actually. And so I thought, well, I'll sort of focus on that. And because climate change is totally solvable, you know, it's very, very simple. Even back then, we had all the technology that we needed to deal with it. And so I tried to go ahead and find a way to make an impact on the other thing, and eventually worked in education and other areas, still thinking, yeah, this whole climate change thing is really solvable. I, unfortunately, like many people, underestimated the power of people in charge of conventional manufacturing and fossil fuel industries and their willingness to do whatever it took to make money at the expense of their future and ours. So fast forward, we moved to Oregon. We decide where we are starting a family, and we ended up adopting my daughter through an agency called Journeys of the Heart, and we went to meet her and her birth family in the Marshall Islands. A year later, we adopted my son, Isaac, who was born in Chicago. Just out of curiosity, raise your hand. How many of you have heard of the Marshall Islands before? Yeah, not the typical response, but awesome. If you haven't heard about it, I'll spare you most of the details, but it has this intersection of nuclear and climate. And on average, it used to be 7 feet above sea level. So once she became my daughter, and I always knew I was going back to work on climate stuff, but I knew it was only a matter of time before I needed to find a way to talk to her about this. And somehow talking about the history of slavery with my son and with her, my son is African American, felt a whole lot easier, even though, as we all know, the legacy of slavery continues to this day. So at some point, I think I had tried to drop some gentle hints, but there's really no way to tell a 7-year-old that the land where she's from, that you've taught her to be proud of, is one of the first countries to be going underwater because of the negligence of people across the world. So I got some help with this from the Oregon Zoo. She was there and they had a little diorama about how polar bears were struggling. And that was the beginning of our conversation. If you've ever heard her speak, you may have heard this story from her perspective. So because of my family's caring about this issue, we started getting involved back in about 2012, 2013. Met Bill McKibben, ended up doing a lot of things with different nonprofits like PDX, 350 PDX. But what we consistently saw were two things. There were very few children or young people. It would typically was either college students or elders. And most of the people showing up were European American. So one of the things we sort of as a family set out to do was change both those things. And it doesn't take a lot, but something as simple as having an activity for children suddenly makes it more family friendly. And I think, of course, a lot of people stay away because they're afraid of talking to their children about it. This is 10 years ago. Now it's getting harder and harder for even parents of a 7-year-old to avoid the conversation. So my conclusion, which was one of my best calls, was that the best way to get involved in climate was to put my kids front and center and let them learn with me and let them become leaders as well. And so we're connected to the local congregation, P'nai Or, Jewish Renewal, and they wove this into both of their bar and bat mitzvah projects, a sort of social justice project that they needed to do as part of it. And so we ended up doing a training by Plant for the Planet in Seattle. And when I first heard about this, it was the first time I'd come across anything that was targeted at youth. So we drove up to Seattle, they did this one-day training, and I had a hunch before we even walked in the door that this was something special and I needed to know more about it. So I volunteered for the day as their photographer. Longer story short, I became the acting executive director for the US for Plant for the Planet. And when we brought that program to Oregon, because at that point it was only in Seattle, my kids helped to lead the first training. One of the things, like I said, that was very important to me was making sure that the many people of color who are very impacted by this issue and their children felt very comfortable coming to events, that they wouldn't be the only people like them there. We at one point attended a hearing in Salem, about 300 people. Some of you might have even been there. And my kids looked around, they're now about 12 and 13. And my daughter says, "Hey, Mom, I think you're the youngest person here beside us." She could have also said, "You're also the closest thing to a brown person beside us," because it was pretty close to being true. And that day was one of the days that I saw the impact of having diversity in climate work firsthand. There was a panel of the people who are listening to whether they should put these 3 fossil fuel projects through. All of them seemed to be much more interested in the fossil fuel lobbyist than in the speakers. But there was a new member of the panel, the only person of color, an African-American man. And I watched him as my son went up to speak. And Isaac had his rapt attention. And at one point, this man saw me watching him. And it was like suddenly he felt he had to hide how he was feeling. But it was really powerful for him to hear about my son's concerns because of this thing that they shared. Later, by the way, one of those projects was denied, and the person who was the head of the commission, who I also watched, I saw her watching my kids very carefully, was dismissed by the governor out of displeasure because she hadn't approved all three. So you kind of wonder what happened that day. But there is a magic when you bring people who have some firsthand experience, and you bring people more than most of us, and people who are children or young adults into climate spaces. It's a topic I'll come back to in a little bit. So we started the training. We've done most of them in Oregon. We've also done trainings in California, Washington, and Pennsylvania. And for one of the first things that happened within about a year of us doing the trainings was my kids spoke at an event at the Hollywood Theater. And we got a call not too long after that asking if they were interested in being plaintiffs in a federal youth climate lawsuit. So back in 2015, they both joined as plaintiffs in the Juliana lawsuit, making me the only dual federal plaintiff mom. I'm guessing that more of you know about the Juliana case. Is there anybody who does not know about it? Raise your hand, please, if you don't. Okay, I'll share some things later in just a moment, but just to tell you a little bit more of what's happening right now. As you may know, we have this idea that you have a judicial system in which there's a lower court, the district court, that hears federal cases. And then depending on how that goes, it might go on to appeal to the circuit court. And depending on how that goes, it goes to the Supreme Court. This has been the racquetball of all cases. It has been to the Supreme Court twice. Looks like we're on our way for a third time, but it's never been allowed to go to trial. And that is because of the intense fighting that 3 administrations have done against these 21 youth who brought the lawsuit. And for the years, they still do, I'm sure, I'm sad to say, stood shoulder to shoulder in the courtroom with the fossil fuel industry and manufacturing industry at their side. So it's still going on. You'll see a lot of articles suggesting that, oh yeah, that case is dead. It's not. It is a continuing challenge for sure. Move things over so I can see better. So as I mentioned, this is our nonprofit. I think I didn't mention the name, but it's Climate Change Recovery. And our program is Youth and Adults Acting for Our Earth. Yay. Oh, and it paused my screen sharing. That's lovely. Let's try that again. Some people may have questions about the legal arguments. I'll briefly touch on those, but that's something you can get best from the Our Children's Trust website. This is my family about a year ago on our first only vacation not involving the word climate in about a decade. It was really nice being together. But you'll see, nevertheless, we're sporting our YouFigov suits, sweatshirts, which is the nickname for the lawsuit, the Juliana case. This was a really wonderful thing that I got to do this year. We had a rally for the Juliana case out in front of the White House. It was very beautiful and powerful. Unfortunately, President Biden did not appear, and he's the one person we need to have listened to this case right now. So there are, I'll share a link in a moment that you can use your phone to scan the QR code, get the website, and please do, if you haven't already, signed the petition, because we need this case to go to trial or be settled by the administration. We just can't wait around. So this join, I don't know if the Join Juliana link is still up. I should have checked that before. But in the upper right, you'll see a picture of the plaintiffs several years ago in front of the Supreme Court. The funniest moment in the lobbying, most painful and funniest moment in our lobbying, in conjunction with the rally this year, was when several of us sat in the room with Bernie Sanders' aides. And they said Bernie might come. They weren't sure, but they handed out masks. So we were hopeful. And suddenly Bernie walked in the room. All the youth were asked to introduce themselves. And one of our Oregon youth, Alex, youth is in quotes, said, well, it's so nice to meet you. So I filed this case when I finished high school. I have since finished college, gone to law school, passed the bar, and I am now a practicing attorney. I didn't know that anyone could make Senator Sanders speechless. But he just sat there for a second and finally managed to sputter out, well, let's hope you're not a grandfather by the time this is solved. So it was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The Youth v. Gov documentary, if you haven't seen, is on Netflix, and I really recommend it. These are the key arguments that have been used throughout the case. It varies a little bit what we're stressing, but the public trust doctrine, the idea that it is the government's right to protect us, not to burn all the fossil fuels they can. Fifth Amendment due process, that the whole right to life, liberty, happiness, prosperity, that's based on having a stable climate system, as the Judge Ann Aiken has found in some of the early trial steps. And like I said, we haven't been to trial, but that's some of the early findings. And then equal protection, because as we all know, the more years you have ahead of you, the more likely you are to be infected by serious climate impacts. It's also worth noting that children are more vulnerable in other ways, just as they are from nuclear radiation. So, developing lungs can't handle the kind of wildfires that we've seen. And part of that 14th Amendment is that we are supposed to be protected from state-created danger and have a sense of personal security. And it's always good to remind folks, how many laws there have been that are unjust. And so this whole set of things around the climate crisis is just the latest version of that. If you'd like, I'll give you a little bit to scan. It's got 3 things up here. One is a link which will bring you to the petition to the Juliana case to sign off, and you'll also get other things from Our Children's Trust letting you know about the importance of putting pressure on the administration. Really, right now is the way to go. They may not act now, they may act after the election, but they need to act. It's also not a bad time to start reaching out to the vice president, I think. That picture, by the way, is of all 21 youth in Central Park a few years ago. The center one is for our nonprofit, for the website. I'll bring that up again later. And then the one on the right is just a really neat thing. Some really wise folks have said that one of the things we need to do more of is not just talk about the climate impacts, but talk about the future that we can imagine given where we are now and how we can build a beautiful future. And I think the sweetest, shortest thing I have seen is this video by AOC and Naomi Klein. It's just a beautiful thing to watch. So if you scan nothing else on that page, scan the last one, and I'm sure you'll be motivated to go find the Our Children's Trust website. So let's switch back for a minute. So I'm going to save the climate change recovery and the trainings work for the last. But I do want to talk next about the elders' climate work. This ironically came out of some of the things we've talked about earlier. When my daughter visited DC, she was 16, I think it was where she spent her 16th birthday. Kind of a bummer for me because I didn't get to go. But she met this group of elders. And she came back and she said, they had me speak at Elders Climate Action. And it's really different. It's like our congregation, Pene Or. They really understand, they care. They don't say dumb things like, oh, we're so glad. And I apologize if you've ever said this to someone. I mean, we appreciate it, but it can be painful as a child or young adult or a parent of a young adult to hear someone say to your, say, 14-year-old, we're so glad that your generation is going to save us. It's kind of this idea that, same idea I had for too long, that somebody else is going to take care of this problem. So we can go about our other business we'd rather do. But she stressed how elders, thank you for that, coming with the QR codes. She stressed how this Elders Climate Action folks seem to really get it. And so many years later, when Liz Lee, who's the lobbying lead for Our Children's Trust on the Hill, heard about a part-time temporary job with Others Climate Action and knows that I am looking full bent for a full-time climate or other social justice job, she said, hey, I know you want a full-time permanent job, but this might be a good one for you. And so that's how I ended up connecting to them, was between my daughter and my friend Liz. So we're doing several things. It's a lot of what we do is a partnership with other organizations, including and especially Environmental Voter Project. And the biggest thing happening right now is the phone banks. So this happens every Friday morning. You can do it at other times of the week as well. The one I lead is Friday mornings. We might do some extras, but at this point, it's just Fridays. It's 8 a.m., technically to 9:15. So by 9:15, you can be done and on with your day if you want. You can also continue to call later. But what we're doing is Environmental Voter Project has identified people who, if you ask them, would almost certainly say climate is the most important issue to them. But they are not voting. And we are calling them and helping them to get the information they need to vote. You'll say that you're a volunteer. You won't say your last name. You won't even talk about the climate. These are already folks that we're pretty sure if they get out to the polls that they will vote in a way that supports the climate. So it's got about a 4-step process, and I'm going to do this training. The training focused on this on Friday, so I'm going to be really succinct about this. But it's they identify the non-voting environmentalists. We mobilize them through contact, things like phone banking and several other ways. And the key here is habit reinforcement. So you might not know this, but if people start to vote regularly, like they vote 3 times in a row every election for 4 years, suddenly they see themselves as a voter and they will vote. And so Environmental Voter Project monitors this, and we reach out to these folks and get them to vote. And this matters a lot. You know, as somebody who's been part of the Juliana case, I think the Juliana case is one of the most effective ways, if we can just get the weight enough behind it to make it get through the current Supreme Court, that you could have. But even more effective than that is this partnership with the Environmental Voter Project, because what we're ultimately doing is changing who shows up for elections. There are 15 million Americans who are in this category of feeling climate is the most urgent issue, and they are not voting. We're down to 13.5 because this work has now turned out 1.5 million voters, new voters, essentially. They were registered, but they were never voting. And by doing this, suddenly you will see a change in who is running for office and who is staying in office, because you can't get elected unless you vote for climate if we do it right. And I admit I know a lot about elections. I know a lot about public policy, and this didn't click until I heard about this work. What is happening is that campaigns, let's say you want to become mayor or you want to become president of the United States, you're only going to target the people who you think are likely to vote, because you don't have that much money. Even if you're working with billions, you need to focus on the people most likely to vote. So when you poll and you ask what's important, you'll poll likely voters. You won't poll somebody who just happens to be a voter. So if we don't have people who care about the climate turning out for elections, then you have really no incentive, unless you are very strong and brave, to have any incentive to act on the climate. And if voters aren't demanding this environmental leadership, why would we expect politicians or people who want to hold an elected office, and that includes judges, why would we expect them to supply it? This is a really nice chart, I think, that really explains what I'm saying. So you look at all these priorities in 2022. This is only 2 years ago, right? So it's not like this is back 20 years ago when people weren't really sure if they were seeing global warming. Oh, guest appearance. Yeah, Miko, it's okay. 4% said climate and environment was the most important issue to them. And you may feel like you've heard polls where it's different, that people really care. Well, they do. Things like the Yale Center for Climate Communications has found that 72%, and this is again a couple years old though, only 72%, but still 72% think that climate change is happening. And I've covered it up. What is it? 60, 65? What is it saying out there? 62% in 2023 thought that Congress should do more. But the problem is those people aren't voting. It's these folks who think, yeah, not really that important. This table has a lot in it, but I want to show it to you because it gives you an idea of the impact we've already made. If you wonder why the last 2 elections came out the way they did, the secret is in this chart. So with 1.5 million voters who weren't voting before, if you look at a state like Georgia, which you may remember had a few runoffs for Senate spots, not to mention you've heard about that a lot in the news because there's a past president who doesn't like how he thinks Georgia should have voted. If you look here, the super voters we created in Georgia are 103,000 people. The Senate margins were under that. The presidential margin was way under that. So, you know, and my training in sociology, social psychology, public policy all tells me that you get these folks out to vote, you make a huge difference. There's a lot of different ways you can help, but this is huge. And the phone banking is super doable. And I am there the whole time to support. And then we get together afterwards and we share our experiences so that people have a chance to ask questions, share really great moments, share challenging moments. And it's been a really amazing experience for me and for the folks there. And, you know, I am looking full time in all my non-existent free time for a full-time position in the climate movement. And anyone who hears of something, I would love you to send it my way. What I know from doing this work is this environmental voter project, this is a every year-round effort. I don't know whether ECA will continue much. I'm working to get them funding, whether they'll continue much past this year. If that, because sometimes, you know, folks come in waves. They worried about the presidential election, but they kind of forget in the off years. But EVP is there and has done now 1,900 elections that they've worked in. If there's literally one local person running for water commissioner, they will be working that election. So it's pretty amazing. The phone banking, I just want to share that. A lot of times people are like, oh, I can write postcards, but I don't want to phone bank. But one of the things I love about EVP, and this is my sociologist training talking, is that they are doing randomized controlled trials to test their messages to make sure that they're good and solid and the best they can be, and to see what the impact is of things like phone banking. So for example, in a randomized controlled trial by EVP, only 1,340 conversations, a little over 1,000 conversations with low propensity environmental voters led to a 3.6 percentage points increase in voter turnout. If you think back on that map we just saw, that's the kind of thing that wins elections. So it's pretty amazing. We do have canvassing going on, but that's only in 4 cities. But if you know anybody in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Tucson, Arizona, or Austin, Texas, please email me and I'll share my email in a little bit because I would love to get those folks out canvassing with EVP. Let's see, what did I just think of that I wanted to say? It'll come back to me. Any questions at this point? I'd love to just break because I know there are often questions about phone banking. Please feel free to come off mute. We can take turns. So just if you have a question. I'll just keep running, but I can't see everybody's hands with the thing off to the side, but I'm sure our facilitators can help if you do have a question, you want to jump in. They can let me know if you've got your hand raised.
Yeah.
This little screen. Oh, go ahead.
Pam, I will definitely keep track if anybody raises their hand. I can look at that on the participants list. And also for myself, I do have a question. Is this through
Sure.
your own personal phone number when you're making these calls? Do the people you're calling see your personal phone number? or is it
No,
something?
great question. So it comes through like the number registered to the Environmental Voter Project. So they will not see your personal number. You could even not share your first name if you want, but literally the only information they have about you is your first name. But one of the things that EVP has tested that's very important is you introduce yourself with like, hi, I'm Pam. I'm a volunteer with Environmental Voter Project. So what they learn about you beside your first name is that key volunteer. And there's been a lot of research showing that volunteers are more likely to be listened to on a call like this than somebody who is perceived as being paid. And then Environmental Voter Project kind of gives them a heads up that, hey, these people care about the environment like I do. Not that every single person we reach is like that. I want to make sure two other things. I saw a hand up, so I promise I'll get to you then. This is the one I keep forgetting. There are a lot of other organizations, including Center for Common Ground, who I worked for a couple years ago. If anybody, by the way, works for a company that has a Benevity connection, please let me know that when you connect to me, because they will basically pay for your volunteer time as a donation to any nonprofit you work with, if they are certified through Benevity. But one of the things that Center for Common Ground did through their Reclaim Our Vote project is they are working to get people of color better access to voting because they are the subjects of voter disenfranchisement, as are young people, as are low-income folks. Not surprisingly, maybe, those three groups are exactly who we're calling with ECA and Environmental Voter Project, because we found it's 80% of the people we call are 34 years and under. That's part of why it's really important to me to get elders calling, because elders, there's like this grandmother effect where they listen to you if you're a grandparent, but there is also something to be said for somebody calling who's your age or a 10-year-old or a 14-year-old. They're going to feel like they do need to listen to. And then also they are often low income or people of color or all three. And we have data on all of that. Lynn, what was your question?
Yeah,
Comment?
well, a couple questions. How do you get through? I mean, everyone today with their cell phones screens phone numbers. So how's your success rate with that? And how do you then eventually get through to these people, or do you leave? Anyway, how's that handled?
Yeah, you bet. And some of this I go over, so I'm trying to share things I don't typically share on Friday mornings. If you join me Friday, you'll hear the other part of this. But to paraphrase one of our amazing volunteers, by the way, that picture in the center is some of our awesome phone bank volunteers. And you'll see the age range even in that. So yeah, a lot of people screen calls. One thing that's happened, and I haven't heard whether this is true on Androids, but iPhones now will let you watch text coming in from a voicemail. So it's like an old-fashioned answering machine. You can see who's calling to debate what they're saying and debate whether you want to pick up. So that's always a good thing to remember. Sometimes we call and we get family members or housemates. So when we call, we're looking for a specific voter because that's important for the research aspect of this, in the validation to make sure that we're really getting the results we think we are. But we still can give information to those folks. And we've had some really sweet shares about, for example, somebody calling a mother who said, yeah, my son doesn't vote, and was getting ready to hang up. And they talked a little bit more and she kind of kept her engaged. And the mother said, oh, and as she learned more, she said, I didn't realize that was happening and that it matters so much. I'm going to work on my son and my daughters, they aren't voting either. And I think they're all in their 20s. And I think that this is really important. And I really appreciate the information. So you can have this big impact even when you don't reach somebody directly. We also leave voicemail. So we have a voicemail script. So if you get voicemail, we leave a voicemail. And then as somebody said, it's kind of a numbers game. So you will get, system will call somebody, they may hang up. As part of why I coach people on how to be able to get out those first few words so they can hear words like volunteer, Environmental Voter Project, who you're calling, and that gives them a little bit better chance to keep on the call. So yeah, there's a lot of hang-ups and people aren't answering, but if you bear with me for a minute, I'm going to go looking for, I didn't update it, so this is a couple weeks behind. Trying to remember. I'll give you my best guess. So don't quote me. You'll have to come Friday if you want the real one. But we've now, just in these last several weeks, contacted as many people as in that study. So we've spoken with about 1,400 people, even though it's only about an hour once a week. The key is getting people to come and getting them to bring their friends and grandchildren and grandparents and so on. And I think we've had something on the order, oh, I wish I could remember exactly, but something like 10,000 minutes of conversations with people. So it is really quite impactful. And one of our volunteers who spoke on a recent national call made the comment, she, like me, she said, I tend to be pretty shy, but then I think about the fact that this is really about saving democracy, and I figure I can take a couple hangups. So I love her attitude. And the other thing I want to share before I go on is that, you know, I had this day job at the Apple store, and I had a couple times where people were, and many times where people were quite rude, and a couple times where people made the effort to come back in and apologize. And I think with phone banking, that's always an important thing to remember, that they have no way of calling you back because they don't have your number. So you just have to remember that sometimes people are going, why was I so rude to her or to him, you know? So I think it's all, you just put it in perspective. And that's part of why gathering together afterwards, another volunteer who was on the national call made the comment that she thought that my background in social psychology was part of why I run the phone banks this way, where we gather together and talk afterwards. And it wasn't a conscious decision, but it was connected somehow. But I think she's absolutely right, because it's really affirming to get to know other people on the call. It's a QR code. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just a tiny, keep it really short. I mean, is there specific training, and you don't have to physically be there? I mean, if I'm interested in in doing this, but you don't have to physically be at a specific location. I can just do it from my phone here.
Yeah, all you need is a phone of any kind and a laptop or tablet. They work as a team, and I go over the training each week. So each week we always have somebody new, and I do the training for them. We also have been having really cool guest speakers. And right before we went on this call, I got an email. I was going to put that in the chat. I'll do it in a minute. Or maybe somebody else can pull it for me. Zanagi Artist, who's the director of Zero Hour, is going to be our phone bank VIP speaker the 1st of November. And we've got Gordon Levitt, who was one of the attorneys with our Children's Trust, this Friday. So there's a chance to hear for just a few minutes from some really special folks, including Miko, you saw a minute ago, spoke at a previous phone bank. Then we do call, so you've got the VIP speaker, you've got the training each week. If you've already done the training, you just jump straight into calls. Do the training, and then you're ready to do the calls. So halfway through that first visit, you'll be ready, trained and ready to do the calls. And then once you've got the training, you've got the information you need to call anytime. So you can come back and chat with us and then go back to do it. Or you can go grocery shopping and come back and do it later, or, you know, spend your weekend doing it. It's totally up to you. Go ahead and scan this code if you can. And there's my email too. We'll send that out later. So don't worry about it if you don't get it. But don't hesitate to ask me any questions. I don't mind you're also sharing my phone number. That's totally fine. Okay. Let me keep going.
Pam, I just wanted to say, I saw Catherine Fredericks come off of mute, and Kelly Jensvold briefly.
Oh, thank you.
For,
go ahead, please.
Catherine, go ahead, and then Kelly, if you still have a question.
Oh, I was just going to say that I have done postcarding for our Environmental Voter Project, and they were lovely to work with, but they doubled the amount of the minimum, and I just can't do that many. So I would like to hear more about how to do the calling, although the shy factor works for me too. I'm much more comfortable writing a postcard than calling somebody.
Yeah, no, I understand. Definitely, if you can make this Friday, come at 8 and I'll fill you in all the way. Yeah, you'll be fine. We've got some volunteers who've written some quotes, and I'm posting this periodically on social media from our Instagram and Facebook accounts. These are some of the VIPs who have already spoken or who have yet to speak. That one in the center, by the way, Fairhaven, is a really neat book. I recommend. The two authors have been two of our VIPs, And it's a novel of climate optimism. So I went to, oh, we had another question. I'm sorry. Who was that from? We got Catherine
Kelly, did you still have a question or did you put it in the chat?
or a comment.
I guess I put it in the chat.
Oh, apologies. Let me see. Oh, yeah. So the reason, yeah, so we aren't doing text banking anymore. The parties are doing that. Essentially, there was a ruling. I haven't figured out what the reason for it is yet, but essentially what they did was they said, we will fine you extremely heavily if you send a text to anyone who didn't explicitly ask you to text them. So I guess the political campaigns feel like they have the money to pay any fines, but most nonprofits have abandoned texting for that reason. So because, you know, I need to reach voters who aren't connected to us. That's the whole point. So that's where the phone banking does work really well. Yeah, it's too bad though. We have one volunteer who literally did 200,000 texts. So, you know, there's some pretty amazing things happening out there, but I definitely recommend the phone banking. And like I said, you know that we've tested everything we're doing, so it's going to be effective. Okay, so I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to weave them together. Our trainings that we do, Youth and Adults Acting for Our Earth, and also, and there's an article I have on LinkedIn, and I would love for you to connect to me on LinkedIn, and you can get the article there. It's highlights the importance and how to get so that whatever organization you're part of, that you are reaching and involving and welcoming people of all backgrounds, especially ethnic, based on ethnic diversity, but it also can be applied to socioeconomic status and other things as well. So we were talking about food waste earlier on. I also have been a program educator for Washington County for a grant-funded position doing food waste reduction. And they were doing things when I arrived, like going to the local Lions Club and making a presentation. That's great. But honestly, your average Lions Club member, they shouldn't waste food because it causes climate change, but they aren't really that worried about wasting food from a financial perspective. One of the things I wanted to do was bring this training to food banks where folks are given food who really need to save money and who often given food that is a little bit on the old side already. So I think that's whatever work I've done, incorporating diversity and equity and justice into it is really, really important to me. I mentioned about how our nonprofit got started. I want to talk about the nonprofit, and I'm going to focus specifically on the issue of ethnic diversity in the climate movement. So we don't have one scheduled right now, and I know you're all climate reality leaders, but I would really encourage you to join the next EA training that we have. One of our best sponsors, Cool Islam, is probably going to host one as soon as I can get enough energy free, probably after the election, to have them host another. Any training we do, no matter who supports it, people come from all over the community. So for example, this one has folks from Beaverton, Oregon, State College, Pennsylvania, and Los Angeles, California, or technically Culver City. But everyone's welcome. And in a moment, you'll sort of see, we started with younger folks because of our connection to Plant for Planet. They insisted it had to be, in Germany, they only train 8 and 12-year-olds. And I immediately kind of looked, sized this up and went, you know what? There's a lot of older kids who need that training, and not just kids. So what we've done is created a network of folks who have gone through the training. It's a one-day free training, and then you're able to go back and lead the training a future time. So these are some pictures from just kind of having fun at the trainings or showing up to testify later. So for example, the young man in the bottom left corner, some of you might recognize. Was the runner-up for International Climate Award. And he came to our first training. And from that very first training, we partnered with, that was co-sponsored by a church, a synagogue, and a mosque. And from that time forward, we've made sure that we are working with organizations that will help us to bring a wide range of folks in who might not never, in other circumstances, aren't going to necessarily go to training by Al Gore in another city. Once you've done the training, then you are able to go out and present. And we've had everything from, you know, people leading another training to speaking at a K through 8 school, doing a science project based on the training that they've done, leading a service. The picture at the center is my son. The day after his bar mitzvah, he was the minister who we shared space with came up to him and said, would you consider letting me use your remarks for my sermon? And we basically said, do you want him to help give the sermon? And so he showed up the day after his bar mitzvah and gave the sermon in the Presbyterian church there. So hopefully you have experience with this through Climate Reality, but there are a lot of places that would love to have you present that you might not even think about. One of the things that's very different with our training, and since you've been through Climate Reality, I'll tell you the secret. It's actually on all our materials, but no one pays attention to it, which is just as well. You show up, you learn from other leaders like yourself, but before you leave, you have yourself presented the same slideshow you first saw in the morning. And it is a very fun, intense, powerful day for everybody concerned. We also have really strong international connections. And I think that's really important for people of all ages because it's very easy to get focused on what's happening in our local area. And it puts it in perspective. And it also gives you a sense that all these other folks have your back and you're working to protect them. Folks in these pictures come from places like Kenya, Mexico, Spain, Gambia, that's just getting started, Chile, Brazil. The other night I was texting with somebody who led the first training for Planet in Pakistan. And if you think we're having trouble here and I'm looking for a job, he's in the same situation. And so we were sharing stories across the world. So this is a picture from our first training. You'll see the conspicuous Planet for Planet shirts. We've got folks who are Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, folks from the Marshall Islands, and many other places. One of the things that when I say diversity, if you had to guess, what would you say that an organization that's working well that isn't founded necessarily by someone who's a person of color, but who serves everyone, what would you consider to be a reasonably high percentage of people of color to show up regularly? Just come off mute and throw numbers out if you would. Or you can say what you see in the organizations you've been to, like if you turn up to testify or Climate Reality training.
Less than 1%, typically.
Yeah, I've definitely been to those. Yeah. Anybody else?
Especially Central Oregon.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's
Less than 1%. Anybody else want to throw out numbers, what you've been seeing when you go to places that do climate events? Okay, I won't put you on the spot, but if you change your mind, you want to shout it out quick, go for it. So it's worth noting that Oregon, it has about 75% European American population. Most of our trainings have been done in Oregon. State College, Pennsylvania is pretty much the same. Vancouver, yeah. Okay, California was a little different where we went, but our EA leaders are 75% or more people of color. And the ones who are the most active, it ranges more like 85 to 90. And you start to get a glimpse of this here. And as we go through the pictures I just want to show you, they get more diverse and older as we started saying, oh, well, we'll let high school students, oh, we'll let college students, oh, you know what? I keep going to things like 350px trainings and people are struggling with concepts that our training make easy to understand. So maybe there's, 35 and 55 and 75-year-olds should be allowed to join us too. So that's where we've gone over time. This was a particular sweet training because a teacher who we were connected to got, I think she's a climate reality leader too. I'm not 100% sure, but she got word out to Adelante Mujeres, which you might know is an organization serving farm workers. So they packed up a bus, put several staff people, 12 chicas from their program, and the son of the executive director, and came to this training. Trust me, Vancouver does not normally look like this. They were really awesome. Here's one from Portland, Sunnyside. I'm just going to go through and kind of let you see the faces, and I'll mention a couple of the cities and places where this was done. So this is Eugene. Don't blank on the name. I apologize. It's the Reform Synagogue in Eugene. This happened as part of Good Deeds Day, a project of the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland at the Pacific Jewish Academy. And as with everything, people come from all over. So it doesn't matter what your background is, you're always welcome at our trainings. And that's one of our super supported conditions that people are very happy to agree to, whether it's at a mosque or a synagogue, or like this one, an elementary school. This took place at my kids' elementary school, which has a two-way Spanish immersion program and is a chapter 1 school. So it serves something like 95% people who are on free or reduced price lunch. That's the principal looking very happy in the green shirt in the center. These folks, by the way, didn't just come from that school. As with all our trainings, we had folks from Catlin Gable, which you get to go to if you are really cool and have some money or really good scholarship. You will see Miko and Isaac appear several times in this because they led a lot of the early trainings. This was a challenging one. We had a blast. This was at Bark in the middle of the Mount Hood forest. We had this is just a percentage of the folks who did the training, but they're listening to Mukta, who comes from Bangladesh, talking about her experiences. Sometimes it's hard to get everybody in one picture. We started getting better at that, but often people are all excited at the end with their graduation gifts and they go running out before we can get a picture. This was our first Cool Islam supported academy. It happened up at Cooper Mountain. Always so busy there, I didn't realize why Cooper Mountain is called Cooper Mountain. It's a great place to hike, but it looks like flatland until you start down the path. And some of these folks you will see are now climate reality leaders, by the way. This took place at Tryon Life Community Farm, supported by them. And as you can see, we are multi-species friendly. This was our first California Academy. Really amazing artist on the right, the tall guy. We brought a team. So what we do is each training is led by people who have done the training before. So we brought a team down in a van from Oregon to lead this training. One of the things which has been amazing about this work, because I need more volunteer support, and feel free to volunteer at any time, is that there are things that I just can't get to. You know, I have to decide, okay, I can only do so much right now. So we have several times had to go back, you know, we've gone back and said, oh, you know, I have my follow-up, people don't always check their email. I really want to reach out and get some more leaders. So I will reach out. Sometimes 4 or 5 years later, I've contacted people and said, hey, you know, you did this training. Would you like to lead the next one? And invariably, people have had a response like Negwas, who said, I love to. And by the way, I want to invite, do you remember, you won't remember her, but Salma, she's my friend and she did the training. I'd love to have her do it too. And I said she was next on my list to call. So this little guy in the hat was a real showstopper that day. And he led our next training, like literally 5 years later. His grandfather brought him down to Oakland so he could lead later. This was Sacramento. This happened at the Solar Schoolhouse in, I might have the town wrong, Sebastopol, California. This was kind of the most, in some ways, shocking training because I was still pretty naive. This was 2017. And I thought, oh, you know, go visiting the Marshall Islands. I really want to bring my daughter back. That's kind of scary because of hurricanes and everything. What I didn't realize was everywhere was scary now, which is why we really need to work together, have fun, and get this stuff done. We drove back from this training I had stayed with a friend who's did the training, and I opened my email the next morning and she said, we're okay. That's never a good sign. Well, it turns out that the amazing wind that we were all laughing at, my son took a video, but then unfortunately deleted it, where I tried to open the van and it literally blew me off my feet. We drove up, you remember the Napa Sonoma fire? That was started as we were driving out of town, essentially. Within a couple hours, it was whipping through. And so, yeah, the synagogue that gave us space to stay while we were there, there's an old tradition of hospitalities to strangers who don't have enough money for a place to stay. They put us all up. They were closed for about 2 weeks because everybody was evacuated from that area. This was a training by Muslim Education Trust, or with Muslim Education Trust. And this was the one that Channel 1, which has about 6 million viewership in schools, came to film. So there's a couple of videos of that on our website. This was Salem Academy. This is another Cool Islam Academy, and the young woman over there with the child is an amazing poet who now lives in Portland and has presented her work on behalf of all of us at the UN. I'm happy to tell you more about these other times, but I just want to give you a hint. Oh yeah, and up in the back row are Negwa in the turquoise scarf and Salma beside her. This was sponsored by 350 PDX in Portland. Back to Salem. Back with one supported by Cool Islam, and this time Bilal Mosque as well. Oops, sorry. State College, Pennsylvania, supported by Penn State. Our first Zoom, we were on Zoom ahead of Climate Reality. And this was really neat because we made use of Zoom. So we had folks coming, and I just have a little bit more to say, so I just want to share this part. But we were able to get folks from all over the world to both do the training and as guest speaker. So Mukta, who you saw at BARC, has reappeared here as one of our speakers. We've got Orla from Ireland. Arham is a student from New York, the upside down one, and so on. Next virtual training. You may not be able to see it, but the little comments on the side is one of our leaders saying, thank you so much for letting me lead. This was so fun. And, we don't mince words. They learn everything you'll learn at a Climate Reality training. But we have a good time and we take care of each other and we have fun. This was our first in-person / hybrid training after COVID, in Vancouver, for a really cool private school, alternative school. This was supported by Los Angeles Community College District in LA, Culver City. Here we're back up at Cooper Mountain, thanks to Cool Islam. We now have Muslim, Hindu, Quaker, other Christian, and Jewish folks participating. And interestingly, sometimes kids sneak in twice. They're supposed to lead the second time, but I'm like, my kid looks familiar. So, if a 12-year-old will come back to something, it's got to be good. And then this is our Oakland training with my son leading. So I thought maybe we should take a second and do a photo with everybody, and we could do silly photo if you like, whatever you like. And then I have one more quick share. Would that be all right to do a group photo? I can do it if you just don't want to. Do you want to do smiling, silly? If you feel like coming on camera, that'd be great. What do we think? Okay, how about smiling? Hey, thank you. Okay, so we'll go through and smile on 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, do you want to do silly one? You're sad, or you can go upside down or whatever you like. You choose, I'll give a count of 3. 1, 2, oh, that's good. Okay, get myself ready here. 1, 2, 3. Do a second one for good measure. Okay, got a slide, and then we're going to turn over to the rest of what you need to do. And we did questions in the middle, so I hope I've left enough time for questions. If not, I apologize. I'll make this really fast. Yep, I have a good memory, one side. So if she can click it right, that is, okay, slideshow, that's what I want. So once more, this is the website for our web. On the left is the QR code for the website, as well as my email below. It's probably best to use that email unless you're contacting me specifically about Elders climate stuff, but it'll work for either. And then on the right is a donation code if you want, as well as the website. There's, just PayPal gets a cut, but we rely upon donations to help with the trainings that we do. And I really look forward to seeing you come to a future one. Does anybody have any questions for me? I know we want to wrap up right about now, but if you have any questions, please. I'm also happy to stay a little bit longer if that helps.
Thank you so much, Pam. This is amazing.
Yeah, you bet.
Appreciation. I don't have a question. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand, either physically or yes, Stephen.
So I just want to get a little clarification. Is what's the connection between Yay and the phone banking that you do? If there is connection,
it's two separate nonprofits. Yeah.
Okay.
We talked about what I would talk about tonight. We decided to do a little Our Children's Trust with a lawsuit, a little bit of this training that has brought out so many people of color into the climate movement, and then the phone banking, which is the urgent thing right now.
Right. And it sounded like you are also doing that in person as well as virtually, the phone banking.
The phone banking we're just doing virtually. There was some talk about doing an in-person one in Florence this Friday because they are doing their 5th anniversary. And Miko, Rob, and I are going down for it. And I encourage anybody who feels like they haven't been to the ocean in too long, like us, to join us for it. It starts at about 2, I think. It's Elders Climate Action Oregon chapter. You can find it on Instagram, Facebook.
Okay.
But the phone banking is all going to be virtual. But we're all together so we can kind of I can coach you through whatever you might need. In some ways, that's easier because you don't have so much background noise that can be hard to screen out.
And that's Friday mornings. Is it?
Friday mornings, exactly. And again, you can do it other times, but a good way to get started is to come for Friday morning.
Thank you.
You bet. Anything else? Oh, and thanks for putting my email in the chat. That's awesome.
Right. If there aren't any other questions for Pam, I'm going to stop the recording. And then we can just chat amongst ourselves without being videoed. Okay, looks like no more questions for Pam. Thank you so much. This is a really wonderful presentation.
You're very, very welcome. I'm so glad to do it.
Thank you.